But anyway, so we're going to use all of that that's at our disposal, and now we've got this situation where the person is really not going to hurt anybody but children. They're probably going to hurt children again. We've got to do something about it. It's not the end of the world if we put them in some sort of prison that respects human rights, that respects their dignity, and it isn't really a punishment. It's just our way of saying this is the best way we have to manage you at this point. Okay, that's not the end of the world. But it is a punishment. We need to acknowledge that in what happens to societies that rely on punishment. What happens to our culture? What's going to happen to us and our mindset? Knowing that we live every day in a world where we punish people, where we play God, where we get into the realm of saying we have the right to do this or that to people, even though it's beyond what is absolutely necessary for the maintenance of peace in the society, or it might be beyond that. So these are issues, but I want to start thinking of terms, when we think of justice, I want us to start thinking in terms that are a little bit more creative than vengeance, that are a little bit more creative, but that still maintain security and still have that potential. Go ahead.
Just because it's painful, I don't necessarily think that it needs to be called punishment. I mean, the idea of protecting the rest of us from somebody may cause pain to that person, but that doesn't mean it's vengeance-based, does it?
No, it doesn't mean that it's vengeance-based, but...
Or that it's painful. Painful. To me, that the word punishment involves the concept of vengeance.
Yeah, it does involve it, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, I think so too. So, but if our punishments are excessive, if our management procedures are excessive beyond what's minimally needed to control something, then I do think it starts to slip into the realm of punishment. So that's why I'm not sure that we wouldn't have a situation where, okay, well, you're a child molester, that means you cannot have access to children anymore. It doesn't mean that you don't get a balanced job complex, and it doesn't mean that you can't interact with your wife, other adults, who you're not going to hurt, and you never have. It's weird. It's weird to think about these things. But maybe that's what we do. You can still have a job. You can still have freedom of association to a great extent. We have to find some solution to keep you away from children. Maybe that means confining you to a space where children do not exist. So, you still get to choose your job. You don't get to be the daycare worker anymore. But you do get to have some freedoms. It's a very libertarian way to look at things, and it's kind of a very frightening way to settle on looking at things.
Well, I mean, there's lots of alternative sentencing to mass incarceration, and I mean something like that where while this person is being kept from children, they're still allowed to do other things, but in conjunction with that is they're going to be involved in that rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to provide the opportunity for people to deal with stuff like that. And one of the good ways, and this kind of goes back to the whole court thing too, is the idea of wisdom councils as opposed to judges, where you have members of the community that it's not one person that can make a decision. It's it's several people,
mm-hmm.
and that's one way to come up with these alternative sentencing. I mean, there's technology that can be used to punish someone, put them under arrest in a sense, and still not put them into a little cage and say, all right, you're stuck there forever.
Right. So we have informed and not mandatory and not universal sentencing type things. So the way we handle people is on a case-by-case basis, and hopefully revolutions in the various spheres, kinship and culture especially, have made it, the elimination of class differences, have made it so that those judgments can be fair and equitable. We're going to rely on those other spheres. If we're going to have fairness in the political sphere, from the electoral system all the way over to the end of the judicial system, what we're going to need is help from the cultural and kinship spheres in a big way. If people of color if we ever expect people of color to be treated fairly, if they expect to be treated fairly, there's going to be a lot of work on all of our part to make sure that comes about. So that when we do leave things up to people's judgments, and the accountability of what you're thinking is really hard for us to judge after the fact, we're going to have to rely on having those people available to make those kinds of decisions. People whose minds have been changed, who have a new revolutionary and radical perspective consistent with these values that we're all saying we appreciate. Go ahead.
I was just thinking momentarily about playing God is like having power over someone's life, but if they willingly, part of the social contract, whatever, from their that they give up that power over their life, or their free, not their life, but their freedom, when they take someone's life.
Yeah, and when we come back to the concept of social contract, there's a lot that's attractive to it that I knew ahead of time, that this is what happens if you do this thing, but it goes back to sort of that deterrent thing where we go, well, at the moment, was I taking all that into account? Do I deserve to pay on that level because of something that I did in the moment? And those are things that I think are going to need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. You know, how aware of the social contract, how conscious of the social contract was I when I did this thing? Is it fair to hold me to that contract, you know, given all the sorts of factors that might be involved in the types of crime that we're trying to mitigate against? All right, that's all I got. I hope you guys had fun. I did. This is really helpful, so I hope to see you in part 3. Time to go relax or do whatever.